Hello, everyone. Guillaume Letzuel here, host of the E-commerce Wizards podcast, where I feature leaders in e-commerce and business. Today's guest is Yoni Kozminski, CEO of Escala and Multiply Me. Today, we'll be talking about how to scale your e-commerce store via systemization and business process standardization, which is the focus of his Escala company. So before we get started, I have two things. First, a shout out to Stephen Pope from My Amazon Guide. Thank you, Stephen, for the introduction. Otherwise, this podcast here today would not happen. And our sponsorship message, this episode is brought to you by MageMontreal. If a business wants a powerful e-commerce online store that will increase their sales, or to move piled up dormant inventory to free up cash reserves, or to automate business processes to gain efficiency and reduce human processing error, our company, MageMontreal, can do that. We've been helping e-commerce store for over a decade. Here's the catch. We're specialized and only work on the Adobe Magento e-commerce platform. We do everything Magento. If you know someone who needs development, design, maintenance, training, support, we got their back. Email our team, support@magemontreal.com, or go to magemontreal.com. That's MAGE Montreal.com. All right, Yoni, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Guillaume. It's a pleasure. And thanks, Stephen, for hooking this up too.
Yes, exactly. And now it's your turn to be the guest on my podcast, was formerly a guest on yours. Thanks for having me as well back then. And tell us a bit about you and about your Escala company.
Sure. So my background stems largely in the agency world. So I grew up in creative and digital marketing agencies, effectively growing up with those businesses, working with large enterprise clients, but always from the eyes of a small to medium business. So I was the 10th employee at an agency that grew to about 35. And there I was looking after everything that relates to web development and design. So much like what you're doing over at Mage. All the way through to social content strategy and production, media buying. And, this was for clients like Mastercard, Mercedes, Sony, large enterprise clients, but always from, like I said, from the eyes of a smaller business. And yeah, that was really how I found my way into the world of e-commerce and digital marketing. Today, as you mentioned, Escala is one of my companies. It's a management consultancy focused on process improvement. And the goal really is like, how do we help businesses build their internal systems so that they can run and operate at scale rather than just trying to stack another person onto it and trying to figure your way through what is, a needle in a haystack when you haven't been there before and you haven't done things at true scale and size.
Right. And out of curiosity, like in your entrepreneurship journey, was it influenced by where you live? I mean, you have a bomb shelter in your condo. This is not exactly common. Let's say here in Canada, I would not even know where to find a bomb shelter. It's not a concern I have.
Yeah, so I would say that like the biggest influence for me, or the biggest sort of impact, has definitely been growing up in agency land. Having a pace that is agency life. Unless you've lived it, it's very hard to sort of quantify what it is to be around the clock and answerable to clients. And, I'm sure you can acutely, be aware of when a website goes down and, don't ever launch on a Friday for anyone who's stepping into the game.
No, never. Even Thursday, try to go earlier.
There's cardinal sins that you learn when you're going through this journey. But for me, growing up in a business that was 10 employees that grew to 35 and another one 15 to 40, I sort of went through that journey of what it was like to not have really middle management, and there was senior management, and it was very one-dimensional to how do we build more expansive teams and create single-threaded leadership. And I never really saw it effectively achieved in my personal experience for businesses that I've worked for. And this is definitely something that we work really hard to do internally and what we do inside of the Escala business model in and itself. But yeah, I mean, like you said, I grew up in Australia. So, started off launching Mercedes-Benz Australia, New Zealand social channels. That was the time where there was no Facebook or Instagram or YouTube for brands. It was still an unknown and taboo about 10 years ago now. And, when I came to LA, I saw things really at a big scale, working with Medtronic. I think I was working with a small arm of the Medtronic business, the diabetes arm. At the time, it was about $6 billion. So I would say that the visibility of seeing what effective process and scale looks like from the eyes of someone who, as a business, was just trying to figure it out was pretty influential. And now I live in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and that was really where I dipped my toes much deeper into the water that is e-commerce specifically. Working in and effectively growing an e-commerce business from 2 to 5 million that was acquired by one of the aggregators that are acquiring all the Amazon FBA businesses. So I'd say, like, in terms of what's played a big part, absolutely seeing what scale looks like and experiencing that in the US. I mean, there's few markets on planet Earth that behave like the US market does and the opportunity. And yeah, I would say that's probably my most influential. I don't feel that I've taken a whole lot from outside of personal development since living here in Israel. It sort of feels a few steps backwards in terms of the level of sophistication and systems that exist internally. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, living and working with so many different cultures and countries and time zones has definitely had an impact too.
All right. Cool. So let's dive into it now for that e-commerce business. I agree that very often when it's not just a question of a sales problem, let's say it's not just a question of, oh, I'm having a hard time having traffic that converts on my website. If it's not that kind of more foundational problem, the other foundational problem that typically appears once you do have good stock level, good financing to buy more inventory, and you have plenty of traffic on your website, it's typically the founder that becomes very quickly the limiting factor for the growth of an e-commerce business, or the leadership team in place when the founder has a leadership team in place. So let's talk about that. How do you scale an e-commerce business from your point of view?
Yeah. So I think, like everything in life, it's understanding where you are and where you sit, in your current state. So in order to scale, you have to have the visibility and understanding as to what are the limitations. Where do I sit today and where do I want to head tomorrow? So if I'm talking Escala specifically, we look at how systemized the business is based on people, process, and technology. And so building a baseline and a fundamental as to where you sit. So, if I really drill it down all the way back and I make it really simple, we each have 168 hours in our week. For a lot of these founders that struggle, they are the bottleneck, and senior leadership becomes the bottleneck, like you mentioned too. Now, when you look at how you break down your hours and how you're effectively using your time, I mean, I don't know if you could call it a game, Guillaume, but I would call it, I would call it a game where you look effectively at, at your infancy, how is my time being distributed throughout my week? So for tasks that need to be me specifically, or the founder of the business or the leadership team, I would rank as a 5. And for things that really don't need my involvement, my input, let's say for e-commerce businesses, customer support, it's the same questions effectively that are typically coming up. That might be a 2. When you start to get control of the baseline as to how you're investing your time and what's actually moving the needle, then you can start to understand how you can either, as a baseline, offload things, or how do I start bringing professionals in to help actually take me to a whole different level. So before you can even start talking about building a system, which we will, and I'll gladly step into it in a moment, you really need to understand who you are, where you are at as a business, and what does that next step actually look like? And without having that visibility or that understanding, it's very hard to move forward. Just like what we say in Escala, everyone always wants us to build a future state, build us the future state processes. We just want to, we're doing everything wrong today. Ignore what we're doing. Let's just build a future state. And the reality is, it's way too ambitious to build a future state if you're not, you already don't have control of your current state. So it's the same from a personal level too. Get control of your week, get control of your day, and understand what your 30 days, 90 days, 6 months looks like before you start really trying to, build in that BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal 10 years down the line.
So basically, you start with an inventory of the current state of affair for everything in the company, where it's at in terms of the people, process, technology, how sophisticated it is. And once you have that inventory, which is very logical, you need to take stock of the situation. Then you build that future state and say, okay, how do we get from here to there? But of course, let's take stock of the current situation.
For sure. And as you start to evolve that further, like, one of the topics I mean, it's not the sexiest topic to talk about, but I think for people who are trying to scale their business, SOPs, standard operating procedures,
It's
you
a
get to.
must. It's a vital must. You understand as soon as you try to scale, it's going to blow up in your face unless you do that. And then you understand the value of it, and then becomes interesting because that's what will help you to achieve your goals.
100%. And it's like, going back to taking that stock take of where you sit, when you figured out how you're investing your time, then you need to start thinking about, well, how do I empower my team members to invest their time wisely too? So building out the standard operating procedures and understanding what are the stages? How does the business function as a business? And how does that next move down to my individual task? And how is that connected to the overarching business objective? I mean, I'll let you guide the conversation, but I could go all day about this stuff.
It's yeah, there's a lot to talk about, that's for sure. Okay, so first you take stock of the situation, you got your inventory, then you got your future state you want to be in, and then I guess you plan how to get there. And interrupt me anytime if you want to add something to those steps. Once you have a plan on how to get there, which is already a huge gap that I'm leaving here, that maybe we can discuss about that. How do you, first of all, come up with the plan, and then maybe we can talk about implementation and staff and all that.
So I'll give you some really simple, like baseline things that we like to educate people on, so that they can understand like the difference between. And again, this is like very basic stuff. It's nothing like what we're delivering, but again, the first stage is comprehension, understanding the current state. So I'll give you a few bad examples of what people tend to do when they look to approach building their current state SOPs. So the first thing I would say, and is the most typical, is that let's say you're trying to teach a new developer, and you've been developing, your own Magento sites for years. All of a sudden, you want to onboard the next developer. What typically will happen is there's a specific function inside of it that you think is the easy thing for he or she to deliver on. So you'll straight away start building up. Okay, I mean, I'm not the most technical. I'm not the most technical here when it comes to Magento. So, let's say I want to jump into this specific line of code in the CSS, and I want you to, effectively audit it and add, these baselines, whatever that might look like. What we would call that is taking a bottom-up approach, where you, the individual, have looked at a specific function inside of the delivery mechanic and are trying to deliver that. Whereas what is going to serve you much better is to take a top-down approach, where does that actually sit inside of the operation, inside of the business, inside of it. So you want to take a stock take first of how does each of your different departments work together? So how does the developer talk to the designer? These are two clearly distinctly different departments. And then from that communication flow, how does that then handle client services and the relationship to that? So you build out the top-down approach and you understand what's happening at a business level before you start moving into the sub-processes. Because what happens 9 times out of 10, you'll build this SOP. It'll be the way in which you've defined it, and you'll be the only one who can find it. And it'll be for a very small subset of what's happening. So, I can give you another example of how you can sort of visualize that. So if you're listening in, think about an effective folder structure in Google Drive or Dropbox. It's very frustrating if I'm saving things one way, you're saving things another way, and then the rest of the team is saving it, and I can never find the files I'm looking for. Whereas if we built a very clearly defined, here's the CSS, here's the HTML, like client name, CSS, HTML, design, banners, logos, brand book, all the different folder structures, I can go to each one of your clients and figure out, okay, I found the stuff, there's something missing, I know where to go. So it's the exact same with building process, is that you have to have one overarching methodology where everyone can understand how it actually works and how you can dive deeper into each specific function of the business. So that, for us, like our litmus test is, can someone who's never worked in the business and has a baseline understanding of how our system works find the processes that they need within 10 seconds of jumping on our process map, all the way down to SOPs.
That's a big challenge. You have a good search engine, I hope. So.
We've got a great methodology.
Yeah, okay. Because that's always a challenge. Like, how do you name even your SOP for that specific thing, or how do you find it? Then people will not categorize the stuff the same way. Uh, that is a challenge. Do you use a specific tool to stay organized with this, or just put that in folders in Windows Explorer?
So we use it's a free tool. It's called draw.io. And that's what we build. It's like any mind mapping tool, or there's other things you could use to deliver it to. But effectively, we build like a visual structure, like decision matrices of what's happening. So, I mean, this will be hard to follow along, but stop me at any time. So, when we're looking at it at a high level, we build our process groups and our core processes to start with. So we look at as a core process, like what are the 4 or 5 functions in a business that need to happen so that it functions. So for an e-commerce business, you'd have, let's say, inventory management would be one, customer support. You'd have, your marketing and your brand management, for example, might be 4 of the 5 core processes. Now, from there, you actually get into the details of what happens in each of those. So from customer support, you get a new ticket, it moves through to being vetted, and that's your process group and your core processes. From there, what we do is we move into our sub processes. So this is the third layer down, and this is where we start to define who the individual is. So let's say let's stay on the line of customer support. So the customer support representative, what they do to actually deal with a ticket. So it becomes even more detailed around the specific functions. And how does customer support relate to, let's say, client services? How does that message get communicated to your client when you're dealing with a ticket? So, we have 5 layers of our methodology on how we build process, and it goes to working activities, and then full SOPs would be levels 4 and 5. So again, like just explaining that to you, we don't have a great search function because everything is uniformly defined. So when I look at a core process and the process group and then those sub processes, we use a numbering convention. So for the first one is 1.1.1, and then the next stage 1.1.2. And so every single one of those numbering conventions will be connected to the SOP, will be connected to the core process, the process group, the sub process, the working activities. So you always have a marker as to what is this connected to at every single stage of the process. I don't know if that's too much to absorb. For me, it's like very visual in my mind, but hopefully that was that was clear.
I think it's clear-ish, clear-ish. So you have a
Clearish.
core process, you have a process group, and then you have sub processes, and then you have specific work activities.
Yeah, and then below that would be the SOPs. Now, I'm not ever going to try and distinguish the difference because it's even hard to like. It's very nuanced. And again, we're a consulting practice. We build process for businesses, so you don't really need to go to those levels. That's like that's professional level, where a lot of our methodology originally stems from EY's methodology. Now, I can actually give you an example now of simply put, how very small changes in how you would describe an SOP will actually have much more value. So let me give you the example, like an example that we typically give out. Let's say we're using Google AdWords and we're looking to identify potential keywords. So if I wrote click here to download the keyword search term report inside of, Google Analytics, whatever the tool is, right? Now, for a lot of people, that's how they would approach it. It seems relatively clear, right? You've listed the technology, you've told them to download the search term report, you've given them what they need, but what is typically missing and where we look at it as a business is systems are the combination of people, process, and technology. So we've named the technology, but we haven't defined the person who's responsible, and we haven't defined the process. So if I the exact same thing, right? Um, Click here to download the search term. The marketing analyst will click here to download the search term report every Monday.
Yeah.
Very small tweak, but all of a sudden I've defined the cadence in which I'm going to deliver on it. I've defined who is responsible, the marketing analyst, and I understand the tool used. So again, the sentence is about the same length, maybe a few words extra, but realistically, it's a totally different output and a totally different outcome when that individual knows when and who is responsible.
Yeah, that's a big difference. Yes, similar bit to the agile methodology of how to write your user story, who's doing this, what needs to be done, why do you need it, and here you have a cadency, which we don't have in agile, typically, unless you decide to add it. Okay, this is very interesting there. So okay, because it's always a big challenge for people to even find processes. Um, and the other software you were talking about is just a mind mapping software that is actually a free part of the Google Drive suite.
Correct.
Okay, all right. So okay, so you mind map your core processes, your groups, and all that. Company can hire you to do that, or they can do it themselves, or they start themselves and then they say, I'm going to hire someone. That's very likely to happen. Um, and then you get the work activities and SOPs. Okay, that's a good start. So we still have a lot to do between getting from the current state to the future state. So this is what you're saying here is just mapping SOP for the current state. So this is not necessarily how we want to do things. This is how we're currently doing things.
Correct. And I think also depending on the size of your company will also dictate sort of how far the truth is from the daily delivery. So for a larger company, and I'm not even talking hundreds of people. I'm saying the difference between a 5-person company and a 15-person company without processes built in will create, ever growing gaps because I'm going to see it one way, someone else is going to see it slightly differently. The other person involved, if we take, for example, web development, the graphic designer is going to see it one way in how to build it out from a design function, but the developer is going to say that, well, that's not really possible for us to build out specifically. And then the account manager is going to say, I've just sold all of this in. You guys have to figure it out. And so all of us are slightly in a different position. So taking that stock take and interviewing. So, I mean, again, I can only talk from what we do internally for our clients, but what we do is we deploy a consultant into typically two consultants into the business, and we'll interview, shadow, and review all the documentation and get all the information around how everyone is actually delivering. So, you know, if you don't have an external consultant, it might be helpful to leverage someone from a different department to ask all of the questions because inherently there's going to be some level of bias. I'm going to say, well, this is how I'm doing it. This is how it works. So having someone else interview and understand and validate what's actually happening already brings a lot more clarity to a business. You can already start to find a lot of the bottlenecks, a lot of the limitations, a lot of the challenges just by asking the questions, getting the material, and then quantifying where those gaps are. That's the building blocks for building the future state is getting 100% clarity on what the delivery mechanic looks like. Throw out some examples here. Someone's using Notion, someone else feels more comfortable using Monday. You've got someone using ClickUp. Slack communications are happening all the while, but this is really a task that should have been delivered. And then I forgot about it because I was using my, Momentum, which is a plugin. So it becomes very convoluted very, very quickly in a business, especially as it's growing. So standardizing everything is key from those folder structures to everything in between.
And do you go a bit further in terms of like um, keeping or not keeping some the level of creativity, or to truly go down the nuts and bolt, or I could say, in this SOP could say tie your shoes, or could say explain how to tie your shoes. So and it's going to be very different. So one SOP is sort of assuming that the person is qualified to do the job and has perhaps a supporting software or training program or LMS, the learning management software, supporting it, and this is the SOP assume you're competent. Or do you favorite SOP that are more, let's say, really telling you how to tie your shoes?
Yeah, great question. So I would say that you're better off being inclined to building things all the way through to how to tie your shoe, because the reality is this information can be leveraged to onboard new talent. Nothing's more costly than having the CEO step in to educate someone on how to tie their shoes effectively. So I would say, as a baseline, putting in all the detail is critical for you to remove yourself from that function of the business. But what I will say with a caveat is that it's a living, breathing organism. So if you're not focused on updating these SOPs, on a regular basis, if you're not doing like what we do, upskilling days where we as a company come together and think, how can we improve the processes further and how can we continue to add more value? And I would say, as you become even more sophisticated, you hand over ownership. So we have single threaded leaders across function. And part of that deliverable is that they have to continue to evolve the offering, the service offering. How do we have to be better than we were yesterday. We definitely can't be worse than we were today. So the whole notion of really driving these processes forward and always questioning the status quo, even if we've built a process and it lives in our company wiki, it's not untouchable. It doesn't mean that that's how things will live and remain to be in perpetuity. Anyone can inject a new idea into it. You just have to effectively pitch it. Why is this a better idea and a better process, a better technology, a better person, a better structure? What is going to have the most impact in supporting, in our case, our clients to achieve more with less?
And let's say you touched 2 points. One about the leadership to upkeep those SOPs is very important. We can come back to it. And the other one, like to keep up the discussion about like how SOP does tie in with internal training program, because of course you want people to have continuous improvement, continuous training, and so on. And if the SOP is so specific that it tells you how to tie your shoe, like how will it be used, and perhaps the psychological profile of people who has to use this at one point might be fed up of using such an exhaustive checklist and say, look, I know how to tie my shoe. Maybe I want a summarized version of this and just keep the learning into a separate learning process.
Yeah, you're saying all the right things and you're hitting all the right chords. So building a company wiki. So this is how we structure it. Effectively, the how to tie your shoe is inside of the company wiki. It'll teach you absolutely everything that you need to do to the most granular detail. Now, there's no reason that you have to go back to that every single time that you want to deliver. What we do, we use ClickUp, huge fans of it. And what it allows you to do is to build templatized processes. As let's say you're bringing on a new client, I'll just duplicate that entire checklist and you can streamline through it. So you don't need to go back to how do I do every stage? It's always connected. So the numbering and naming conventions are always connected. So if I forget a specific process or function, it'll take me back to the company wiki. But effectively, if I'm doing this day in, day out, there's no reason why I need to, go to that level of looking at it every single time. That would be a waste of time. So having, how we look at our company wiki is effectively an LMS, a learning management system. And from that, we build the templates that allow us to deliver projects. And together they work really harmoniously.
Okay. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, and what about the leadership to upkeep those SOPs? Because that can be a challenge, or even the ideally you have people that are perfect and fully autonomous that will upkeep it all the times and there'll be no flaws. But reality is you probably need some check and balance or a process or a system in place for people to upkeep those SOPs, or some leaders might upkeep them and some won't. How do you manage that?
Yeah. So I would say that is a company-wide objective. So when you look at the culture, for us, it's inbuilt in performance management. So for us to have updated SOPs, what we do is we have regular meetings. We have inside of the Escala business, there's a weekly leadership meeting where they talk about key topics that relate to how we progressing, how we pushing forward, which is different to the weekly learning session that they have, where they'll go through a new idea, a new concept. We actually spent a long time listening to a podcast called Think Like Amazon. And in it, they interview top Amazon execs on great podcast, by the way. Tyler Wallace is his name. And so they were listening to that each week, and we were taking what can we learn for some of Amazon's leadership principles that can be applied to our business, for example. So to your point, having people responsible and accountable as it relates to their overarching performance helps it massively. And then having some sort of regular cadence in where you're meeting around, the idea of what's happening in the process in the business is critical too.
So a regular cadence, weekly, monthly, whatever, like to see what is changing in the SOP, to hold people accountable. So it's a buddy system too. And I like your weekly learning session. We do a lunch and learn. Doesn't happen every week systematically, but I like that. It's sort of to share the team's knowledge with the rest of the team so that the knowledge circulates in the company. And I like that weekly learning session. It's a pretty good idea.
It's great. Honestly, we just went through. So, I mean, the beauty of having a consulting practice that focuses on process is with our other business, our staffing business, they've just deployed in for 20 weeks into Multiply Me. And we just went through a 2-day upskilling day, which was incredible. It was amazing to be a part of. What we are now going to implement is probably once every 6 months because it's pretty intensive. But we effectively, as a company, sat together, broke off into teams, and we built the perfect process from defining the outcome that relates to success in a role to how do we build a job description against that outcome to how do we then interview to make sure that that outcome relates to that job description to how do we then onboard that person and what does that onboarding plan look like for specific roles in the business. And so what we effectively did was we built this end to end. And so you can take that any way you want, Guillaume. But if you were to do an upskilling day like that inside of the business, it actually turns it into something almost competitive. It felt competitive to me, where every single team wanted to outdo the next team. And we offer them, our team. Everyone got lunch, so lunch on the company. It was a really fun couple of days, and it was a great culture experience too. But that was a really great way to continue to have everyone involved in the upskilling, because the reality is you're just we're just each of us one individual. Your team are the ones who are living and breathing it every single day and have most of the really intrinsic and high value knowledge that relates to how the business operates on the day to day. So, activating them and enabling them to really be the drivers around it is probably one of the most valuable ways to both build process and to get the most out of the time in business.
And then if we bring that back to, let's say, the e-commerce store owner, basically it's a question of auditing your own time, where your time goes, and making yourself being replaced in the company, which is not a new concept, but it's very challenging to do, especially if you're a self-funded growing company and not a venture-backed company. So auditing where your time goes, and with the objective of delegating absolutely everything, and then standardizing each process. One thing that I find useful is each time I do something, I record a video of myself doing it, and I just say out loud my thinking process. And this way, the next person can sort of take over. And I hope that this is the last time I ever do that single task. Then somebody else in the company will take over. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's key. I mean, one word of advice when you're doing those recordings is keeping them really concise. So like how we're building process is, when you think through around efficiency, if you were to think through, a 2-hour informational video around whatever it is you're working on, to find that one nugget of insight might waste 2 hours of the next person's time. So how we recommend people build out those learnings is, document the process out in written form as the different stages, and then record 3, no more than 3 or 4 minute videos on those specific functions. Because it does 2 things. One, it saves time on the other side where people are coming to search for it. But also, if there's one little thing that changes, Magento makes an update. You don't want to have to re-record the 2-hour video. So, really cutting down to that lowest common denominator of what I need to find and what that function is is really helpful. And yeah, we're huge believers in, Loom is obviously a great tool,
Yep,
but anything like that for sure, it's a must these days.
fully agree with that. Um, okay, and then of course, a founder putting this in place will need to give himself some time for the employee to uh, execute correctly, even with an SOP and explanation. And there's training, there's going to be mistakes. We're all human. So personally, I find that most employees, I find them really good after like a year and a half doing a job. So if they leave, then that's kind of sad. We all hope employees stay for the long run for many, many years, because even with like very detailed SOP, clear priorities, and so on, unless it's a super low skill level job, if you have a higher manager, mid-level manager job or something like that, they'll need a good year and a half of learning the industry, learning all the SOP and how they connect with each other, and then uh, yeah, so to just have some patience with the staff there. But if it's put as a clear objective, I can look back and see how many processes like that used to be my day-to-day task, and now, well, I haven't done invoicing and I don't know how many years now. So, but it used to be my number one concern when we were a smaller company. I come in, I want to do the billing, the invoicing, and make sure that is going out, because that's the cash flow of the company, was sort of the most important thing. And now, well, I don't need to bother with that. So it's really a big transformation for an entrepreneur to be able to let go of all those responsibilities and just go one by one, and then you can be sort of grateful, say, hey, wow, look at all that I've crossed off the list, that I don't need to do those anymore. That's kind of fun. you know
I think you touch on a really important point though for the entrepreneurs out there listening in. At some point, when you want to grow a business to any real significant scale, you have to be okay with relinquishing some level of control. It would be impossible for you to run your business in its current state right now if you had to now double check every entry that's come through, invoicing in accounts payable, accounts receivable, and you're looking at every dollar that's come through. I mean, that would be the start and the end of the business right there. It's not the most effective use of your time, right? And mine too. We have accounts payable and receivable and a financial controller and a fractional CFO now. I mean, they're critical functions, but there's going to be people who are both more passionate and, at least in my case, more capable. I am not the numbers guy. So, yeah, just going through that process, really understanding that it starts with building a process so that you can start to relinquish that control. And once you have that comfortability, knowing that it can be performed accurately, that's when you can start to sort of breathe, a little sigh of relief and understand, okay, I don't need to be directly involved in every single function and aspect of the business. And, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about, the notion of burnout in one of our previous conversations, but the reality is it's the fastest way to find yourself burnt out is when you're trying to absolutely handle every aspect of your business. And, I'm the first person to always put my hand up and say, I'm really not good at a lot of things. I'm just not. There's some things that I am really good at. And so my goal every single day is just, how do I lean into all the things that I'm best at? And, taking process, I can build process, sure. Am I the best at following through with it? Definitely not. But that's why we bring in project managers. That's
yeah.
why I'm looking for an executive assistant now. That's why I'm bringing in the infrastructure around me so that I can play to my strengths and be really, I can be the best version of myself and add the most value to the company, because it's a team effort.
Yeah, I had another entrepreneur interview with Vinny Fisher. He was saying if somebody's a good CFO, they're typically not a good controller. If they're a good controller, typically not a good CFO, and vice versa. It's a different psychological profile. And the guy knows he has like dozens of controllers working for him. That's his business, basically.
Yep.
So the check and balance that I see that works for this, for example, we have a bookkeeper, then we have another administrative assistant bookkeeper that verifies that work, and then it is
Mhm.
verified by the controller, and once that is all done, then it goes to the accounting firm that has all the staff and the tax specialists and all that. So check and control is by having, I believe, many levels like this, people that verify the work and are held accountable. Also, if you're having a lot of issues, I remember having issues with some specific areas of the business that it never seemed to be working right, even though like SOPs, documentation, training, and this and that. Sometimes it's just, well, you're not hiring someone who's capable enough or skilled enough or high level enough for that specific job or function. So I can think, for example, my HR director, she's way better than me at all that HR stuff. And it's like quite a relief to have all that burden taken off my shoulder. But you see, I've been running the business for all 14, 15 years. I hired someone with 12 years of professional experience, and that person's way better than me at that specific field. And that's like, wow, okay, that's a great help. So if this specific area that it doesn't seem to be quite working out, well, maybe you need to sort of upgrade the level of person that you're hiring. Might mean a slightly higher salary as well in the quality of candidate that you're looking for, that perhaps this is too demanding for the level at which you're currently hiring.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, how you outlined it, different psychological profile, the balances and checks is one thing, and it's critical. Like I was saying, we've got accounts payable, accounts receivable. They validate each other. We've got a financial controller who sits and validates over the top of them. And then for something that's more strategic, we go to our now fractional CFO, who will actually tell us, well, what's the valuation of the business today? What will it look like 5 years from now? And what are the levers that we need to pull to invest our capital wisely, as opposed to simply just saying, cool. Because, I mean, I could talk about this topic too, about lead and lag metrics as well. Like it's one thing to be checking your budgets every month and effectively knowing, like, are we plus minus profitability? But it's a very different thing to understand strategically, what does this look like as a financial model, and how can we evolve it 3, 4, 5 years from now to add more value and, make more money.
Yeah. And that's a good point. Your SOP can totally cover your lead and lag metrics, especially accounting is purely a lag metric. Like looking in the rearview mirror, you don't know what's coming.
Yep.
Sure, you have account receivable, accounts payable, but that doesn't mean your sales are up to upkeep all that level and so on. So for sure, you need to have both of those metrics. Anything else that comes top of mind in terms of helping entrepreneurs in e-commerce stores to unblock the founder or to scale to the next level in any way?
Yeah. Great question. I would say there's typical things that we see a lot of the time. So I don't know if I have an answer to your question, because I feel like I'm a bit of a politician now. I'm just circumvented your question, and now I'm going to answer the question that
We
I
can
wanted
put on
to.
pause, make you think for a minute.
Yeah, yeah. There's a few things that we see that happen really often, and this is what SOPs really solves for. Like, we call it like the hero product syndrome, where you might have 50 SKUs that you're selling. 3 of them are the ones that are doing the best, and so you start to focus all of your energy and attention on those high performing products. Now, if you build the systems and the process where you actually build in resource and time allocation to all 50 of your products, not just the top 3, then all of a sudden you give the ability for all of them to grow. And so, like, that's one really simple thing that having a process and building that in actually unlocks, the Pareto principle, 80/20. If you as the founder or the key driver in the business is caught up on doing inventory management or customer support, it means that you're not doing new product development, for example. So I don't know if I have any more necessary tips here. I feel like we've gone through a lot of different areas, and it's one of those things too, Guillaume, where I'm always cognizant of, like, I'm very much in it. This is what we do as a business day in, day out. And without visual markers, it can be a little bit confusing. So that's why I'm always trying to go into the folder structure example, or things that people can really sort of bite and chew and digest. Because if I start going on and on about this, I lose people pretty quickly.
But you have a good point. Yes, that will be applicable for very early startup. The concept of still doing customer support. For sure, as a founder, you want to get out of customer support as soon as you can, because this is something that can totally be delegated, or even like you do like the hosting companies or IT firms that you may have support level 1, 2, 3, or whatever, so that people know that, okay, well, I'm going to escalate this to the next level. If you're concerned that the junior might not give the proper level of service, you can just declare the person as a junior, and then this way you just get support out of the way. But that keeps being valid for every other task. You said inventory management or whatever else it is. Like I'm pretty happy hiring happens without me for developers. It's like I just green light that we need one more person. We need it by that date, and it just happens. So then the HR director will get that person, review with the other PMs, and so on. And the goal is, I'm almost done replacing myself in the business, but not quite. And I believe that's the goal for every business owner, so that you can then transition to what I'll call fully the CEO role and have no COO role left, no operations role left, and you can purely focus on those big partnerships, on those kind of marketing activities, like having, let's say, like podcasts or whatever, other kind of interviews. Then the very large deals just come in as a closer. If it's a service business, or perhaps even for product business, to close the large, negotiate the deal by your staff for inventory or whatever production. So yeah, I think we've covered pretty well the topic. Any last thoughts?
Any last thoughts? I would say, if you're going through the journey of building process, simplicity over complexity. Just start with something, start with, don't try and build a Ferrari, get your Toyota out on the road. Just start putting a few things down on paper, build those core processes and process groups, and then start to focus on the areas in the business that require the most attention or are the most easier to offload. I would say, like, I just read a book, Atomic Habits, and it talks a lot about, effectively just making sure that you're showing up, that you're delivering, 1% improvements over a day or a week or a month or whatever. It's incremental improvements. So don't try and change the world in a day. Just start somewhere and just commit to building it out. And you'll soon find that when you build process and people follow it, and you are staying true to an enduring business without having process, it's pretty hard to scale any business.
Right. Well, thank you, Yoni, for being here today. If people want to find you, how they do that?
Yeah, so if people want to find me, they can email me at Yoni at YONI at weareescala.com, or Yoni at multiply me, spelled MII.com. Yoni Kozminski on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. Any one of those channels will get me, or check out our websites. If there's show notes, I'll send you over the links. And yeah, I feel like you're you'd be the show notes kind of guy.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thanks for being here today, Yoni.
Thanks for having me. It's great.